This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community, working in legislative, regulatory, and political arenas to promote the free enterprise system. Information at vachamber.com. Virginia hospitals and health systems provide jobs. They support our economy and promote public health. Local hospitals are always open to help people with unexpected health needs. Having a stable healthcare network is vital. Virginia hospitals are our lifeline.
It's amazing what my students with special needs can accomplish. Their pride is priceless. That's why I teach.
Brought to you by the Virginia Education Association, because a good education is good for everybody.
Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.
Welcome to This Week in Richmond, and welcome back after way too long since you've been here to Maria Everett, who around Capitol Square and around the Commonwealth is known largely for your work on FOIA, the executive director of the FOIA Council, and the work that you've been doing there. Worked in legislative services prior to that time, coming here after a degree from Virginia Tech and then a law degree from George Mason, and
Correct.
have been here and know FOIA upside down and backwards in every way. And while we're still in the General Assembly building, we wanted to have another time to have you talk about FOIA and help people who've heard about it, don't know what it is, and then we'll dig in a little bit deeper. So what's your elevator speech if you were going all the way up to the 10th floor where your office will be down in Pocahontas for that long, not a short one? What's FOIA?
FOIA is a mechanism that allows citizens and the media, who are also citizens, to gain access to information about government records, to get records from government, as well as to understand meetings of like school boards and meetings of the General Assembly, local governing bodies, public service authorities, any deliberative body, to be able to be there and watch the deliberative process.
Well, that sums it up.
That's sort of kind of it.
That sums it up. I think it's been 5 years since we had the opportunity to have this
Right.
sort of a conversation. And the show from 5 years ago, and by the way, our viewers, if they want to go back and see your show earlier or others, they're all archived on blueridgepbs.org, and they're there. And I was taking some notes, and what I found was that you said that you received about 1,800 emails and phone calls, and I think that was over in a month's
That's a year.
A
in a
year's
year's time.
period,
Yeah.
1,800. Has that number changed much over the years? Is it more now? Is it less?
No, it's about the same. We, anywhere between 1,600 to 1,800 phone calls and emails that we field each year. And as I like to tell people, there's no such thing as a stupid FOIA question. And so we receive calls from largely citizens and the government, and from time to time the media, just on clarification. Can they do that? Are they allowed to? Can we get this record? So we tell people there's no such thing as a stupid FOIA question, because for 17 years fielding that many questions, we have yet to hang up the phone and go, oh my word, what an idiot. Because this is a tough law, not to understand, but people have their perceptions of what they think this means, what freedom of information means.
I'm glad you said citizen, because I think it's important that that people know that it's not just for elected officials or just for people in media, that it's really available to anyone in the Commonwealth. And I suppose you might get calls from people outside of the Commonwealth too.
Yeah, you get all like data aggregators are, people like LexisNexis or like even the Crime Times. I mean, people that are using government records to make money. That's part of what the Freedom of Information Act does,
So the call comes in today, and you have a recollection that that's similar to the call that you had in the past. Beyond keeping it right up here and knowing what the law is there a way that those are somehow archived in libraries or in searchable databases? Have we gotten that electronically up to date that someone could go on and find that information, or does it really take you and other staff people answering their question?
A little bit of both. We also, in addition to what we call informal opinions, we do a formal opinion like the opinions of the Attorney General, yet ours are open to anybody. And so our formal opinions are posted on our website. And so they're the full-blown legal analysis. So those are sort of available. It's interesting that you brought up about archiving all those 1,800 because I started out with call records, and part of those call records is what is the question asked, what answer, so that we could be consistent. And so we were working with IT folks to come up with a database, but it never kind of took shape. It was unwieldy and stuff. And so next thing you know, we have 17 years worth of phone records and email sheets. And
Wow.
and I always say, lawyers and cops are sort of anal retentive. We never want to get rid of anything because you never know.
Right.
But we don't even use them because after all this time, we kind of know we're consistent in our opinion. We like to say we live in FOIA land, and so we think about this stuff all the time. And so there's not a database of our informal stuff, but I think the formal opinions kind of track, and we have so many educational materials that we have published that are available online that tie to our formal opinions.
You speak of online, is that really FOIA Council?
Yeah.
That's the way people would search for it?
Right,
Yeah.
the Virginia FOIA Council.
Yeah, all right. And so living in FOIA land, I like that expression. I would think it's possible that an answer you gave a decade ago could be different from an answer you give today because of the change in the law?
Definitely, or a change in the facts, that it's the law's evolving as well as it's factually dependent. And while we're not triers of fact, I'm not the judge to say, well, your facts I'm going to accept, your facts I'm not going to accept. We just try to apply the good faith people are telling us. And so they're really hypothetical if you really want the truth of it, because it's kind of the idea that if these aren't the facts, this isn't the opinion. So if you skewed the facts that you give us, then that might not be the right opinion. But yeah, the law does change, and a factual detail may change that make an opinion given a decade ago not necessarily applicable today.
The 16 to 1800 during the year, there are probably some that are similar, many of them completely different. Could you pull one out of your memory and with no names, of course? You wouldn't use names, but
No.
but to give kind of an example, what would be? There's probably not a typical one.
No.
But what would be one that you would tend to get maybe more than once a year, more than twice a year?
I think the question tends to relate more to criminal investigative records, whether
Interesting.
it's media or citizens who've been involved in a criminal investigation, or maybe just curious because they know something happened in their neighborhood. And under FOIA, then criminal investigative files are not subject to mandatory disclosure. And when I say that, FOIA is a mandatory disclosure statute, which means if somebody asks for it, we on the government side must give it, unless somehow in state or federal law it's exempt from mandatory disclosure. And when FOIA was enacted in 1968, there were only 5 exemptions, and now there are 165. But the criminal, 165. But the idea, I think, is that Virginia's approach, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but Virginia's approach is very narrowly crafted exemptions. So you have a lot because we don't have these generalized kind of exemptions. But criminal investigative records are that whether you're the subject of that investigation or somehow involved, you're like, can I get a copy of that? And the answer is, if they choose to let you have it, but they're not required to give it. So media wants criminal investigative reports. There was a legislator, actually, Virginia legislator, that wanted to write a book about a notorious criminal trial and wanted to get the investigative files, and the answer was no, we're not releasing it. So that's over and over again, that's one of those things. But then people's perceptions about what FOIA means, they think we're the repository of every government record.
You have the records yourself.
In the history of time. And we have to tell them, no, we have our own records, but you need to ask, or who do I need to ask to get a copy of an accident report? Who do I need to ask to get a copy of minutes of a board meeting? And those kinds of questions. And then we get lots of government questions about, well, like yesterday, somebody called and said, we're having a meeting tonight and it's going to be about evaluating the town manager, but we're going to change the location where this closed meeting is going to occur. Do we have to give new notice about where that closed meeting is going to occur? And it was like, no, you don't have to, But if you change the regular meeting part, yes, you would have to give notice of that. So it's just really always the details of the law that people are not sure. I mean, it's a 50-page statute. And as I commend to people, it's like, if you're having trouble sleeping, pick up the freedom. There's so many laws that you could do this, but the Freedom of Information Act is, it's pretty short on, it's all open. And then you get the 165 that says, but these do not have to be released. And the reason for that is recognition that there's sometimes government needs to play it close to the vest. And we do it in the name of privacy, like personnel records, scholastic records, medical records. We do it in the name of educational records. We do it in the name of legal advice, public safety, whether that's battered spouse kind of, and victims of abuse, whether that's adult protective services kinds of things, all the way to people trying to blow up buildings. So they're in distinct categories to help people find an exemption. But we tell people, don't try this at home. You have a FOIA council. They live in FOIA land. Just call. Just call us anytime and we'll help you out.
Now, several times you've talked about FOIA Council.
Right.
And so you're the chief, you're the head of the FOIA Council. Who else makes up the FOIA Council?
Well, I'm technically the executive director, so I'm the staff person.
Right.
So the head, no.
Yeah.
The doer, yes. So the FOIA Council's got 12 members. There are 2 legislative members, one from the House, one from the Senate. A bill passed this year to increase, so we'll have 2 senators, 2 House members. And then we have a representative of the Attorney General's office, a representative of the Library of Virginia, because that's the record retention. How long do we have to keep records? That dovetails nicely with FOIA. Then we have a media position, a local government position, and the rest are citizens out of this 12-member, well, soon to be 14-member body.
So the FOIA Council then has its regular meetings, but in the interim, if I call or a viewer calls you after seeing this, then most of the time it's something that you can answer that you don't need to take to the FOIA Council?
Yeah, I think that's a correct, an accurate representation. When the council was created, and since I was its first and only so far executive director, it was, how are we going to do this? Because the council is only required to meet 4 times a year, and that's kind of what they do. So they're not the answerers. The idea was to have staff that can provide the answers on a day-to-day basis.
We hear a lot about transparency. As you reflect on the time period being executive director for you, is it more challenging? Is transparency more challenging, less challenging for people to try to find out? And I guess part of where I'm going is there's all kinds of communications now that I don't use them myself, but all kinds of apps that you can use to communicate that really aren't that available. So what's your perspective on transparency? Transparency, I might say, among elected officials at any level. Is it more difficult, more challenging?
That's a great question. When I do training, which is part of our statutory mission, I usually ask people, and who's tired of the word transparency? And everybody raises their hand because, car
Right.
dealers are transparent,
Yes,
everybody's transparent.
Right.
Which ultimately transparency is about trust. And I think that's really what FOIA is about, is that it's a semi-permeable membrane. Things come into the government and most things come right back out. And that's really the purpose of transparency, to trust that, when you think of government of, by, and for the people, we're the government. Like this morning when I was walking my dogs in my hideous dog walking clothes, but then when I put on my uniform, I magically turned into the government, which is kind of a interesting thought. But the idea that we're just citizens running our own business. And so as far as elected officials, there is a distinction that there is an exemption in FOIA for correspondence, and that's limited to the office of the governor, the lieutenant governor, members of the General Assembly, legislative services, the clerk's offices, and presidents of universities. So, but where I said members of the General Assembly have a correspondence exemption, locally elected officials do not. And so there's a distinction there, but it all sort of ties back to what people perceive this law to be versus their actual knowledge. So we have, like I said, plenty of educational materials, and really for elected officials, this little trifold thing that says everything you need to know about FOIA, about meetings law, about records. And so because of technology, we've got texts, we have all manner of communication that under the definition that was crafted, way back in '68, it would still be a public record. If we own it in the government, we prepared it, or merely we have it and it relates to the transaction of our particular public business. So under that broad definition, it could be like body-worn camera video, video on a school bus, a map, a database, a paper record, a CD. We don't care what the form it is. If it relates to the transaction of public business, it is defined as a public record and available for the asking. But again, 165 exemptions. And I'm not saying that's too many or too few, but when it's very surgical, so you see repetitive things, but they're for different agencies. So it's an interesting law, I think, and it's an important one for sure.
And it is somewhat interesting to know that there's one standard for local elected officials and one for state officials. And without our digging into that too much, I think the viewers would understand it's the state officials who pass the laws that pertain to that. So
Thank you for saying that.
Probably enough said.
Yeah.
But thinking about the exemption on the communication for state officials, I'm thinking of one friend whom I enjoyed working with who's serving time in prison right now. I think convicted based on an email.
Correct.
And so I don't know if the law changed after that or before, and maybe his email was protected, but the person at the other end, theirs was not protected, and that's how it was
Correct.
discovered.
And that's exactly what happened. As a state legislator, he could protect his email and any
Right.
correspondence he had that related to public business. But the other side could
Yeah.
not invoke his, well, this belonged to him, so we don't
So
have to release
if I received it,
Right.
even received it from an elected official who's, I get what you're saying, then they could go after what I had in my.
Right, because otherwise nothing would ever come out, and that's not the point of the law, since citizens are the beneficiaries of everything that we do in government.
Now, when we had the conversation before, you talked some about the rule of three, the rule of two.
Right.
Is that rule the same for state officials as well as local officials about how many people can be present and talk about official business?
Yeah, that's the consistent, well, with one codicil, but the idea, this is the meetings law, is what is a meeting.
Right.
And so when the school board meets or the board of supervisors meets, clearly a public meeting that the citizens have a right to attend. It's interesting that FOIA does not grant a right of public comment. You get to, it's sort of an eyes and ears. You get to witness the operation of government. But again, the General Assembly has a different rule because FOIA tracks down to, when they're all physically assembled, whoever that deliberative body may be. But then it tracks down to 3 or more of the same body and the discussion. So that rule of 3 doesn't apply to the General Assembly because 3 out of 100 is hardly momentum. 3 out of 40 is hardly momentum.
So out of going back to the FOIA Council, out of those meetings, proposals come for changes in the law. You work to get consensus on the FOIA Council, so I suppose that it would be rare, if perhaps never, that something that's proposed by the FOIA Council fails to get adopted by the General Assembly. They tend to, when it comes out. So let me go to what now in 2017 is on the agenda for the coming months of the FOIA Council that you'll be studying and deliberating on, that viewers could be interested in and may want to attend one of the meetings.
Oh, I wish they would.
Yes.
We just to backtrack a little bit, we've just finished a 3-year study that was dictated by the General Assembly to look at all of FOIA exemptions and to get rid of obsolete, redundant, to clarify, to just kind of give it a facelift, if you will. And so some of those issues, I mean, you can imagine 3 years, and I'm glad it was 3 years, because going through 165 exemptions,
right.
And that's just record side, and then there's like another 50 on the meeting side. So we had to postpone. So one of the things we're looking at this year, and we have a meeting next Tuesday, and it's a work group meeting. We have a subcommittee that's of the FOIA Council that looks at it, and it's about proprietary records and trade secrets. And so in those categories of FOIA exemptions, we have ones about proprietary records and trade secrets, and yet you see exemption after exemption, trade secrets by this agency, trade secrets by that agency, and it seems like, well, couldn't we just write an exemption that says, if it's a trade secret as defined by the Uniform Trade Secrets Law, it's exempt? And we tried to go down that path, but, and this is not a negative comment on agencies, but they're used to working with their own exemptions. They know the 4 squares. So to tell them we're going to have a general one and then we're going to strike yours, it makes them a little nervous.
Right.
And then also, what is a proprietary record? You know, we don't define it in the law, but the dictionary definition means exclusively owned. And we've had a Virginia Supreme Court ruling that said proprietary just means an ownership interest. And so again, we repeat proprietary. We say confidential proprietary. What the heck is that? And so trying to find, can we make one generic exemption or one for trade secrets? We're also looking at criminal investigative records, because that's the perennial topic that we will look, we're going to do this serially, so a subcommittee will change its composition. So right now on the table is proprietary records, trade secrets, and then we'll roll into personnel records, because the complaint has been government too often withholds things as personnel that should not be considered personnel. So, and then we're going to do criminal records, and then it's on our website, but the final one is technology. Always, you know,
Right.
Technology here, the law here, and to look at definitions and terminology. For example, FOIA, the last time it was rewritten before this year was in 1999. And so we said, you know, where the government has the ability to post records on the internet. which is kind of funny now. And so looking at, we talk about format and medium and, so let's just try to catch the law up to what technology's going to do.
We'll send people to that website because
Great.
once more our time has run out. But
Yes.
thank you so much, Maria.
Thank you very much,
Making
David.
it human. Yes,
Thanks.
thank you.
This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community. For jobs, the economy, and public health, Virginia Hospitals, our lifeline.
The Virginia Education Association, because a good education is good for everybody.
Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.